Hello, scholars! So here is a mini lecture to talk about source citations. And source citations are pretty important for us here in this class and then moving beyond the class because people need to know where your information is coming from. And it's a little bit different than when we write papers and submit reports, because when we do that, we have a bibliography that we put at the end of these things, and anybody looking at the paper can see those things. Now, while we still have bibliographies when we turn in speech outlines, we don't give the outline to everybody in our class and all of our listeners. Instead, very few people see it. And in our course, well, it's going to be you and it's going to be me. So when you get up to speak, we need to hear your sources. And this is going to be true in public speaking pretty much anywhere you go, just to make sure that everybody understands that you've done your research, that you have put in the time and effort to find facts, to disseminate information, to take the time to turn that information into knowledge. And the better your sources, the more credible and more intelligent you sound. And we live in this kind of very weird and dangerous time right now when we're talking about source citations, because we have these wild claims and accusations being tossed around by a number of people that are in an extremely public eye. And I'm not just talking about our highest levels of government, I'm talking about all the way down through bits of government. I'm talking about people in the entertainment industry. I'm talking about CEOs and titans of industry. And we're seeing many of these people go onto a gigantic forum, whether it's a nationally publicized television program, a local show, radio, news, I mean, really any sort of media, and they're just saying things without having any proof. And sometimes, sure, they know what they're talking about and what's coming out of their mouths is in fact a fact. But what we're seeing now, really, more than we have in the previous couple of decades of discourse, that what these people are telling us is categorically false. And that's a tough thing to come to grips with, because we want to believe these people, but at the same time, we need something more. And while we want to believe people, what I would like you to do when you're approaching public speaking as a listener is to be skeptical. It's okay to be skeptical of speakers. You should actually distrust our speakers just a little bit. Not so much that you're openly hostile, but enough so that you're wondering where the information came from. And the burden of proof, proof of where that information is, proof of fact, proof of sometimes virtue, is on the speaker. And so it is our responsibility as good, critical, ethical speakers to go out and find the right information. So let's talk about source citations, when you should do them, what does and doesn't work. And hopefully we'll get something set up pretty solidly that you'll be able to plug these things right into your speech. So the first thing to really talk about is, when should you be citing your sources? And I'm going to give you just the most basic bare bones rules here, because there's of course exceptions and you should look at the reading to see a little bit more. But to start off, we need source citations whenever you're using statistics. And let me clarify just a little bit. Whenever you're using exact statistics. When we're rounding off things or making estimates, we don't need a citation. So if you're saying that, so you say, well, our Earth has approximately 7.5 billion people on it. Well, I don't need a citation for an approximation. It's when you have an exact number. That's when we need to know. Or if you say, right now an electric car will cost you, the consumer, about $27,000. Again, I don't need a citation for that. But when you say the Jolt will cost you $27,432, that's a really exact number, and we need to know where you got that information from. And to be honest, I actually don't know what a Jolt costs, so you can cross-reference that for yourselves and get back to me. So stats. Let us know where you got that information from. And then the other big rule is, anytime we talk about stuff that isn't common knowledge, and this is a tough one to rectify because we have these very solid backgrounds for ourselves. Me, for instance, you know that I have a strong background in communication studies. So it's really easy for me to forget that not all of you know exactly what I'm talking about when I start talking about these very obscure theories and different philosophers and rhetoricians. So I need to be sure that I'm explaining where that information came from, not just rely on the fact that I'm an instructor, that I have many degrees, that I've published. I want you to know that what I'm telling you is in fact fact. So for yourselves, despite regardless of background, you need to think about what the audience does and doesn't know. If you're heavily versed in the area of psychology and you bust out a very interesting psychology term that people in your field use all the time, but nobody else knows anything about, you got to help us understand what that means and tell us where it came from. And when you do this, we need to hear who said it. Now, that who can be a person, it can be an organization, it may be some sort of book, but who said it? And then, probably more important, why are they qualified to say it? It's not enough to just tell us a person's name, give us an organization. You have to tell us why we should trust that person. Because a lot of times when you're citing very heavily influenced academic work, nobody in the class is going to have heard of these professors, these researchers, sometimes these organizations. Why should we trust them? So, for instance, if you cite me in one of your other classes and you say, hey, according to Christopher Anderson, Aristotle believed that rhetoric was extremely important for public speaking. Nobody's going to know who I am in your other classes. Well, maybe a few people will, but not a lot of folks are going to know who I am in your other classes. So you would have to say, according to Christopher Anderson, a communication studies professor with multiple degrees in comm studies, published author in a number of different communication studies fields, so that people understand that where that information is coming from is a credible source. Same with organizations. We need to know why we can trust different organizations. And there are some that it's fine. Like everybody understands that the Center for Disease Control is a pretty solid organization, or the World Health Organization. But when you're citing perhaps, maybe I want to talk about pet adoption, and I bring up the Bristol Animal Shelter. And maybe not very many people are familiar with that, and it's one of the larger, more philanthropic animal shelters in the area. So I need to explain that so everybody understands that the organization I'm citing is in fact credible. And if you can, tell us where that information came from. So maybe you're citing myself out of a textbook. So Christopher Anderson in the book, who did these things in this book, said, or this journalist for the Washington Post in the article blah, 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 said this important thing. And I understand that sometimes we feel like we're getting convoluted when we go and we explain these very long source citations. But to the audience, it really sounds like you've done your homework, that you've done the legwork to find that good information, and that we can trust what you're saying when you explain as much about the source as you can. So here's a bare bones example. According to Dr. Rowley, brushing your teeth after meals will decrease the risk of gingivitis. But what we don't know there is, what is Dr. Rowley a doctor of? I'm doing a doctorate in communication studies. You certainly shouldn't trust me on the subject of oral hygiene. So we need to know more about Dr. Rowley. So here you go. Dr. Rowley's a dentist, all right? So that's somebody we can trust a little bit more. And we can take it a step further and we can figure out, where did Dr. Rowley say this? In a recent Time magazine article, Your Mouth and Your Happiness, by dentist Dr. Ryan Rowley, brushing your teeth after meals will decrease your risk of gingivitis. So we get a good amount of information there. And when you think about those three examples, Dr. Rowley versus Dr. Rowley, a dentist, versus in a recent Time magazine article, Your Mouth and Your Happiness, by dentist Dr. Rowley, you can really hear the difference to your ears. When you're reading through to yourself, it doesn't sound quite the same, but out loud, you really do hear the difference between the credibility of those three statements, and it makes a big difference to the listeners. So this semester, and in a lot of instances, I don't mean to say this to upset anybody, to put anybody down, but I don't allow you to cite yourself in our presentations. Now, that's not to say that you don't know things. It's not to say that you don't have some credibility, some expertise. So the first reason simply is, if you're only citing yourself, you aren't learning how to do research. And we need to learn how to find good sources of information, sources that are non-biased, sources that have an innate credibility built into them. We need to learn how to access stuff that from journal articles, from newspapers, from textbooks, by going out and doing personal interviews. So I don't allow you to cite yourself. Certainly, I encourage you to talk about your own experiences. I want you to put yourself into your speeches. But beyond that, we don't. And the other one that's slightly lesser, but still important to mention is, at this point in time, not a lot of you are recognized experts in a subject field. And I think you'll all get there. You're working towards your degrees right now, which you should be very proud of. And once you're done with that, you start building up more and more credibility. But right now, people don't call you from all over the country to ask you your opinion on things. You haven't written a lot of stuff on the material, and you haven't finished that degree that you're working on right now. So for this semester, I want you to go and talk to your professors. I want you to do personal interviews with people in the area. Go talk to somebody at the police department, in the mayoral office. Call up one of your elected officials. Contact people at local businesses. Go do the legwork. Go find those people that have been in the trenches, done these things, have done their studies, and cite them. Because when you go do that, it makes yourself sound more intelligent. Now, when I say you can't cite famous quotes, I don't mean that you can't use famous quotes, just that we won't count them as source citations. Certainly, Abraham Lincoln and Amelia Earhart and Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and any number of important and wonderful historical figures had some great things to say, but in general, most of them weren't talking about things that are happening in our community, things that you would bring up in our presentations when you're talking about things that are wrong at the school, when you talk about how to get people to change maybe their cell phone plan. So you can still use these quotes, but please do not expect to get credit for them as source citations. So we go out and we find those recognized experts. I mean, if you're talking about issues inherent with technology, like Steve Jobs, so though we lost him just a couple of years ago, Steve Jobs said a lot of amazing things about technology, about where we're headed with those things, about the use of digital devices. Again, let me clarify what this slide says, because it says bad source modes websites. I'm not telling you that you can't look at websites. In fact, I want you to get on Google. I want you to do some searches. What I'm saying here is don't cite a .com in your source. And here's the example, and I'll give you both sides. In your presentation, I don't want to hear, according to the New York Times.com. Journalist Jamie Shafar says in his article, what I would like to hear is journalist Jamie Shafar from the New York Times in his article. Because even though those two things are exactly the same, according to the New York Times and according to NewYorkTimes.com, really do sound very different to our ears. So explain the source. Don't give us the http://www.farmersmeat.com or whatever it is you're citing. Go straight to the source. So tell us about the author. Why should we trust them? There's a picture of Dan Shetman there in my slide. Dan is a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry. He taught at Iowa State University, where I got my master's degree. And if I wanted to talk about things inherent with chemistry, well, Dan would be a really good source. But I wouldn't say, according to iowastate.edu, Dan Shetman. I would say Dan Shetman, an Iowa State professor and Nobel Prize winner, said. Similarly, go find those reporters, find the journalists, tell us why we should trust these people. This is a tough one, too. And I think the easiest way to explain why we don't use Wikipedia as a source is for me to actually pull up Wikipedia and show you something. So, let me get here to, let's go to wikipedia.org, and let me pick something here. I'm just going to say, well, let's use Tom Cruise. How about that? American actor and film producer Tom Cruise. So if I go to Tom Cruise's Wikipedia page, there's all sorts of great information here, and I don't know why I would be giving a speech about him, but on Wikipedia pages all over the place, Tom Cruise is actually a terrible example because they don't allow editing on his page. How fascinating. We'll try another person. Let's go to the movie Jerry Maguire, a Tom Cruise movie. Okay, so better. There's a great faux pas there. Better. So at every heading in the Jerry Maguire page, you'll see the heading, and then there's a little edit button. So let's say in cameos in the movie Jerry Maguire, if I click edit, this allows me, a plain, simple person with access to the internet, to go in and edit the Jerry Maguire Wikipedia page. So I'm just going to go down here near the end, and I'm going to say, Professor Christopher Anderson makes cameo as a pro football player in the first act. So I've typed out what I would like my new fact to be, and I go down and I look, and it says, oh, look, I can publish changes. And if I click that, well, I've just changed facts in Wikipedia, as you can see here where I'm highlighting. Professor Christopher Anderson makes a cameo as a pro football player in the first act. Now, anybody looking at this page on Wikipedia right now, after I've typed this, can assume that this actually happened. Let that sink in for a moment. And in a few minutes, more than likely, somebody that's volunteering for Wikipedia is going to find that change and do something about it. But for the time being, we're going to refresh, still a fact here about 30 seconds later. For the time being, it appears as fact. So, and we'll come back to this at the end of the lecture and see if anybody's caught it. The point of the matter is, I don't want you to cite encyclopedias, and I don't want you to cite dictionaries, because normal people like you and I send that information in. And I know it seems kind of counterintuitive, but at the same time, these places crowdsource. Like even Webster's Merriam Dictionary and the Oxford English Dictionary, they crowdsource from the world. Anybody can send in definitions and ideas for them to vet and publish. So instead, if you're looking for a definition, cite one of your textbooks. If you're looking for a citation where somebody has said something in particular, go look in the newspapers. And if you want to know what an academic theory means or where a certain bit of information came from, check in a professional journal article that's been peer-reviewed. Okay, so that's the end of that. And I just want to check really quickly here, because we've got a good minute in to see if they've caught this. Oh, I'm still pro football player in the first act of Jerry Maguire. So hopefully that'll hold up for a while. I'm going to check it here throughout the rest of the evening. Anyways, folks, that's the basics on source citations. There's, of course, so much more to it, as there always is in public speaking and communication studies. But I do want you to understand that there are requirements that we need to follow, and we need to try and be as ethical and as forthcoming as possible so that those that are listening to us can trust us.